Is the traditionally expected submissiveness from women a factor for domestic violence or violence against women? But also to Ms. Virisila, how can we shift away from this expectation, and what are you doing about it? Also, what can parents do to sort of move away from breeding toxic masculine boys? And to Mr. Khaiyum, what are you doing to engage young people and engage and empower young people to help prevent this violence in the future?
Okay, well, I'll throw straight to Virisila since it's your main area.
Because I'm the feminist and I work in women's rights, the assumption is that I should be the one combating violence against women. I think...
At least, Virisila, that you should be the first to comment on it.
No, I think that, I actually think that I'm a scratch record. I mean, people have heard me talk about this issue often enough. Really, this should be an issue that those who are in power, like the two ministers who are sitting here, should be commenting about and telling us what are their governments doing or what are they doing personally to address toxic masculinity and to also address this issue around gender inequality, which is what really drives violence against women and girls in all its form in our regions. In terms of what I do, sitting in forums like this is one of the spaces where I'm able to do this. But also I feel that it's my life work. I'm always, not just me, but with others, I'm always pointing out when I see that there's inequality and how that we can work together to try and address some of these issues. But I think that the question should be, what can we do together? I think that's the main thing that I'm trying to point out here, is that what can we do together to try and combat this issue? Because it's not just about women's rights organization, it's not just about feminists, but it's all of us as a community, as a family. What are each of us going to do to try and eradicate this epidemic that we have?
Just to interrupt you there,
sure.
I mean, you point to it being an epidemic, and you're right. All the reporting from the South Pacific suggests there's an epidemic of violence against women and children. In the South Pacific. I mean, yes, it's global,
it's also an epidemic in Australia.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, the statistics I was seeing
I'm talking about the reporting of the statistics in your region. So what do you put that down to, and what are the consequences?
I mean, one, it is, it's a society, as you rightly pointed out, that devalues women, that sees women as second-class citizens. Right? I think it's also the system that we live in that promotes this sort of behavior. I mean, if you look at our region, we have the highest number, we have the worst statistics in terms of violence against women globally. We have the lowest number of women in parliament, right? And we're also at the forefront of climate change. When you put all those things together, it means that women in our region, we are the most vulnerable, women and girls in our region are one of the most vulnerable people in the world. And the question is not what I'm going to do about it, but what are our governments, right? And what are each of us as individuals are going to do about it? Right? Okay. It needs to be about all of us.
Well, let's throw it to a couple of the politicians. And well, tomorrow you'll be the acting Prime Minister, so presumably you can do anything you want. Aiyaz, what are you going to do about this?
If I could read out this quote, it says, and I quote, "This culture, what we call the buturaki, the beating, is deeply ingrained in parts of the Fijian psyche, but is simply not acceptable in the modern age." Now, that's a quote from our Prime Minister. Now, I think the question is, there's a couple of pronged. I mean, I noticed the gentleman...
For the Australian audience, what does that mean, the beating?
Buturaki is basically, the culture of beating up people, in particular, in this case, women. It was acceptable. And what, he's the first Prime Minister that has actually come out openly and has said that this culture does exist in an open platform, in fact, in the domestic platform, also international platform. That, I think, is a start. I mean, I sort of noticed you sort of flinching there when I quoted that. The reality is that you have to be able to talk about these things openly in the public space. So the fact that you have a Prime Minister of Fiji for the first time saying, look, this culture does exist, and we need to be able to address it. Completely agree with Virisila that you need to have a collaborative approach. It's not only about politicians, it's also about faith-based organizations, about NGOs, it's about schools, it's about universities, it's also about governments and parliament. And I don't want to sort of sit here and give a list of all the wonderful things we've done that we think is wonderful. The reality of the matter is that there's quite a few things have changed in Fiji. We had a penal code, or what we call the Crimes Act. We've now, so we have a Crimes Act that used to be preceded by the Penal Code, which we borrowed from Queensland and India from the colonial days, where actually domestic violence was a reconcilable offence. In fact, domestic violence was not even recognized as an offence per se. So now we actually have a Domestic Violence Act. There's various opportunities to get domestic violence restraining orders. You can get it any time of the day. Now, what does that mean to any time of the night? So what you can do...
I mean, what you're referring to, the AG, that's correct. I mean, you've done a lot of legal reform in this country, which is great. Thank you very much. And that's a lot of work that women's organizations that I used to work for, we did all the foundational work for that. But what I'd like to point out is that a lot of the legislation and policies that you're putting in, which is great, that's after the fact. By that point, women are getting beaten up or killed. What I want to know is, and I think what everybody wants to know is, what are we doing to stop it before it gets to that point, before people go to prison, because there is this psyche that exists in our country, particularly in Fiji, and I'm sorry, but it's a psyche that is perpetuated by I have to say, your government, your Prime Minister, has perpetuated this sort of psyche where violence is okay. Because as we've seen in the last couple of weeks, in the last year, there have been repeated incidents of people getting beaten up by the security forces. Buturaki, it's not just about men hitting women. It's about other people, and okay, in our case...
I'm going to give Aiyaz a chance to respond, so let's do that. Now I want to hear from the other panellists as well, so go ahead.
If I can get back against the Domestic Violence Act, in fact,
Actually, can you just respond to what was said there, that there's a broader culture of violence, that the security forces are involved in it, and so on?
Can I come to that? Because there's actually a path I was following. I mean, she talked about the Domestic Violence Act, that they have done work. Yes, I mean, in fact, there was a Domestic Violence Draft Act, or bill, but no government had the gumption to actually put it in place. That's the difference. You can do the work, but you need to have a political will to implement that. Now, the reason I was talking about all of that is because you're trying to create a culture. Of course, it is after the fact, but it also has given rise to many women now coming to the forefront and actually reporting it, because they feel confident in the system that if they do actually report a particular domestic violence incident, it's not going to get swept away. They now have a no-drop policy. I think the argument about security forces, I mean, the reality of the matter is that number of facets within our society, people need to be able to be educated. There needs to be culture of removing the Buturaki culture. Of course, I accept that Buturaki is not only about men bashing up women, it can be men bashing up men. But again, you have to look at, are those people given redress? Are the people who, for example, were violated, the people who are assaulted, have they been able to go through a legal system to get redress? The reality is that, as some of the cases you've cited, in fact, people have been taken to court. People actually have been prosecuted. People have actually been convicted. Now, that is the point of difference. Now, then you get a deterrence effect. That is critically important, as you would know in your work, that the reality of the matter is that when you actually have a problem, you need to be able to build a legal framework around it, to be able to provide people redress, recourse, and then hopefully have a deterrence effect on it.
Okay. Emily, I wanted to come to you on this because you were Prime Minister of a South Pacific country, and it's obviously a broader question than Fiji. So what do you say?
Our experience in Tuvalu is that domestic violence against women has strong linkages with consumption of alcohol. That is the practical experience I know in Tuvalu. Women Affairs Office comes under me, and that's the main issue. So we need to, I agree with Madame, we need to take a comprehensive approach to this in society, not just putting a finger, blaming one sector, one group of society, but we must, for example, the example I cited in Tuvalu, deal with the issue of consumption of alcohol at the home, and social places, and these often, in many cases, lead to violence at home. A husband coming home maybe finding not enough food on the table and all sorts of problems. But there are also other issues involving men's violence against young girls that are prevalent in society that we as a society in the Pacific must focus on and deal comprehensively through policies and regulations and social networking. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done there to keep the women, our women folks, much safer than what the situation is in my own country. That's my feeling and my practical experiences. And I strongly support work for men to take more responsibility in looking after the women folk. In fact, I suggested once, if we find a man being aggressive against women, we just tie him down and tie him to a coconut tree overnight and let the mosquitoes bite him and see what happens the next morning. Okay. Thank you very much.
Could I just make one point?
Well, very briefly.
Very briefly.
Yeah.
I mean, we also now, we set up a 24-hour domestic violence helpline. So we're working with...
Does it involve coconut trees?
No, absolutely not. It's a helpline. We work with the NGO Women's Crisis Center.
Yeah.
The Minister for Women is here, and she'll tell you that it's been working out quite well since 2017. We also have a helpline 24-hour for the child helpline. And you mentioned about children too.
Yes.
We also have in place new laws. So, for example, if a child turns up at the doctor with bruises that cannot be actually explained, it's incumbent upon the doctor to actually report it to the authorities. So those are the kind of proactive measures that are being...